Good morning and welcome to this latest edition of the Elephant Conversations. And this morning it's my privilege to interview my friend, Ms. Atsango Chesoni. Atsango needs really no introduction, especially to Kenyans, but also around the region. Atsango is a lawyer. She is the former deputy chairperson of the Committee of Experts on the Kenyan Constitution. She's a former executive director of the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and she was also a delegate at the Bomas Constitutional Conference here in Kenya. So she is Madam Constitution, and it's a great privilege to welcome you this morning. Good morning, Atsango.
Good morning, John. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a privilege to be participating in an interview with the elephant.
Katiba. Let me just get started. Atsango, I mean, you were involved in the constitution making process in a very intimate way throughout some of its most difficult and most consequential times. And I just wanted to ask if you can describe the constitution making process from your perspective, from Bomas, where you are a delegate, up to the time when you served as deputy chairperson of the Committee of Experts, to the referendum, then to the promulgation in 2010. And then ask you to reflect on your expectations. What are you pleased about this constitution when you reflect on all the work that you did, and what are you disappointed about? Let me ask just for you to give us that sort of background to set the context.
Okay, so basically, I think we all know that when the National Constitutional Conference, which is what people normally refer to as Bomas, because the venue was Bomas of Kenya, when we started in 2002, the conference, the then late President Moi prorogued Parliament, and a third of the delegates to the National Constitutional Conference were parliamentarians. And I think the intention of proroguing Parliament was to disrupt the conference and I think bring it to a halt. I don't know if many Kenyans realize that what became that slogan, Yote Yawezekana Bila Moi, actually began at Bomas.
Oh.
When the announcement was made that the conference had, the Parliament had been prorogued.
Yes.
I remember one of the delegates, it was an elderly gentleman from Lamu, I don't remember his name, started coming down the stairs and, he started going, Yote Yawezekana Bila Moi. And like people just started going, Yote Yawezekana Bila Moi. It was like just this ripple that went across,
yes,
across the hall.
Yes.
And that Bomas is probably the most representative forum we have ever had in the history of this country.
That's right.
Because aside from the delegates, we had groups that did not necessarily have delegates, but were observers, that had observer status. So Kenyans of every single ethno-racial and religious background were represented, of course, this is aside from the constitutional requirements that we had to have persons with disabilities, women. Each district had sent 3 delegates, and then there was, and then civil society was entitled to some slots. The trade unions were entitled to some slots, and so all these different actors. And so basically, we had all these people from all over the country who were very present to the fact that, that what had been a critical historical moment that we had worked for so hard as a country was being brought to a stop by the president. And I think that probably is where I'd say the spirit, this is not something I've ever reflected on and conversed with anyone about, but I suspect that that's where the spirit of no, we're not going to let you just as one individual stop what we as a country have come together to do. To me, that's what that moment represents, the collective, so that now the movement really had moved, because we had a popular movement for constitutional reform, but now, because of the stage we were at that point in time, even people whom I think were not necessarily radical people, who had not necessarily been involved in all that historical process, who may not even have known anything at all about it, by virtue of the fact that they were delegates.
Yes.
And had been sent there by their communities.
Yes.
To represent them, now had this sense of, how dare you?
Yes.
And so, when Mwai Kibaki came in as president, he came in on a promise to give us a constitution within 100 days.
Yes.
And so the conference resumed. And we all know he reneged, but
Yep.
the setting for that reneging,
yes,
on that promise began quite early.
Mm.
Because we came back when the conference reconvened, and I can't right now remember off the top of my head when exactly that was, when the exact date was. But when we began sitting again, for those of us who had been involved in the democracy movement, in the constitutional reform movements, I think, there was this naive expectation that because we now had a regime in power that had been part of the journey,
yes,
we were now going to be like, I had no expectation personally that things would be disrupted again. And then very quickly, there began to be this dynamic where in the media, you would see the conference delegates being demonized,
yes,
and being caricatured. And suddenly we were all Kanu. Whenever we would say anything that, whenever there were discussions that were taking place in the conference that were contrary to the regime of the day's interests.
yes,
Articles would appear in the newspapers about how we were all under the influence of Kanu and were Kanu moles, and
correct,
and those all sorts of innuendo.
yes,
And so there was this propaganda machinery in the newspaper, going in the media,
yes,
about us and depicting us in this way that was basically a caricature of who we are.
yes,
And for me, it was again it was disturbing in the sense that, as somebody who had been involved in the constitutional reform movement, it was always my understanding that there was this respect for the public and Wanjiku.
yes,
For the ordinary, it had been premised on this vision of a process where finally the ordinary citizen had a chance to be the one to determine the country. And we had one of the things that I had learned over the years and in the course of my participation in the constitutional reform movement was that usually this was very unusual, that in most countries the constitution is imposed on the public by the elite, not the other way around.
Yes.
So to see people who had spoken as being pro-people,
yes,
disparaging the delegates who had come in from the districts, and speaking about them in this disparaging way,
yes,
was troubling. And I think that is when we began to see the discomfort of the elite.
yes,
And here I'm including those of us in civil society.
yeah,
With the actual possibility of wananchi raia owning this process.
Yeah.
It's like people had created this process and yet had never in their minds wrestled with, well, raia may not agree with my idea of what the constitution is going to be. And raia are not necessarily all in the same camp as me ideologically.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And you need to respect that. You cannot say that you believe in freedom of conscience and then expect that everybody you're talking to is going to be, if you're a liberal, is going to be a conservative, or if you're a conservative, is going to be a liberal.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, we cannot say we respect that principle and then, confronted with that, be resistant to the idea that these other people who hold different views from us, should be able to express it. So we then very quickly have the assassination, because I personally believe it was an assassination. And those of us who were at Bomas believed that. The assassination of the late Odhiambo-Mbai.
Odhiambo-Mbai, yeah.
Who was the, we went into different tents to deal with different chapters of what would become the Constitution. And each one of those tents had somebody who was a delegate,
yes,
who was responsible for chairing that particular tent.
Yes.
I can't remember what we were called.
Yes.
I was the deputy chair for the one on the legislature.
Yes.
And so Odhiambo-Mbai was the chair for the one on devolution.
Yes.
And so we now started experiencing, I can remember at that point in time, like, one would be you'd be on your phone and you'd hear this noise. The, that noise when you're tapped?
A kind of interference with a call.
There's a click.
Yes. Yes.
That you hear. Yeah.
Yes.
We started experiencing that. And now there was that heightened caricaturing of us. We were all meant to be greedy. We were all meant to be at the conference because we wanted allowances. Yeah. We were all, and the only people who behaved in that way, with all due respect, was the political elite.
Yeah.
It was the parliamentarians. And I should even distinguish between, when speaking about the political elite, because I need to be clear. Political parties also had representatives. I'm not talking about those people. Yeah. I'm talking about parliamentarians. They were the people who would only show up on Friday, literally to go pick up their allowances, until Professor Guy reined them in. Yes. And, embarrassed them, publicly and put in place measures. Yes. But, we'd had a situation where they would just not be at sessions, particularly those who belonged to the regime of the day. Yes. The opposition, I think, because they had something at stake, yes, tended to be more present.
Yes.
So again, I was witnessing, for me, it was a witnessing of the people who, again, had spoken about these values and, yes, principles, and who, again, we thought ideologically we were in the same camp with.
Yes.
Beginning to act in a manner that was contrary.
Yes.
To the to the kind of principles that we thought we were we were bringing into play. Yeah. And so it became very apparent that the regime of the day did not want the new constitution that was evolving.
They were not happy with the direction it was going.
They were not happy with the direction things were taking. Mm. And they, we then had the Sulumeti committee. I don't know if you remember. Bishop Sulumeti was a delegate, and then the late Bishop Sulumeti. And then, there was a committee set up to try and mediate between the different actors, you yes, know. Somewhere in the middle of the conference, we, yes, we start having this committee, which yes, really was not, in theory, if the conference had been proceeding in the way it should have,
yes, there
shouldn't have been need for this body created within, yeah, the conference itself.
Yes.
To try now and mediate, and and so that's when the story of the contentious issues started coming up.
Yes.
But we were not told what these contentious issues were. We were just told they're contentious issues. So people were selected to go into the Sulumeti committee, to go and sit down and try, and like the Sulumeti committee was dominated by the politicians,
yes, Yes.
And so, they went in and tried to resolve these issues. But, clearly, of course, the events that happened at in March 2004 would not have happened if the Sulumeti committee had been successful.
Yes.
And then cases started happening challenging the constitutional reform process itself. Now, one of
cases being filed in court.
In court, exactly.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that there had been attempts to do that was resisted both by Moi and Kibaki was there had been an attempt to entrench the constitution reform process itself, to entrench the Review Act itself in the constitution of the day.
Yes.
Yeah. And the political elite just refused to allow that to happen.
Yes.
And by March 2004, it was clear why they had done that. Mm. Because had that happened, the process that led to the proposed new constitution would not have been possible for them. Mm. Bomas, once enacted at the National Constitutional Conference, would automatically have become the draft that came out of the National Constitutional Conference would automatically have become the new constitution.
Yes.
So there was a case that was taken, questioning that basically asked the courts to determine whether or not the National Constitutional Conference was a constituent assembly.
Correct. Yeah.
And if it was not a constituent assembly, could a new constitution come by without a new constitution needed to either be the product of a constituent assembly,
yes,
or a referendum.
Yep.
And so that case, in the end, I've fast forwarded on this particular issue.
Yep.
That case, in the end, was the reason why what is now our present constitution had to go through a referendum.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But basically, there was a decision that we were not a constituent assembly. Yep. And so that's how we, that's part of how there was an attempt, it was an attempt to delegitimize the National Constitutional Conference in the public. I don't think it was successful, because one of the things that you notice is that the public constantly refers back to Bomas.
Yes.
So it didn't serve the purpose. What it did was create a legal obstacle,
yeah,
but it did not serve the purpose of delegitimization. Yeah. Again, I'm raising these issues because I think, given what is happening right now, it's important for us to reflect on what I think has been consistent. The political elite actually isn't using new tools.
No.
It's that we don't, I think many times we either haven't, for those of us who are aware of these things, we haven't taken the time to step back and just reflect and look at, having these kind of conversations, look at, but wait a minute, when this was happening, what was happening? And then you realize, you see actually, the other things, when we were busy scurrying around in Bomas, distracted with trying to make sure that that we actually get the constitution.
Yes.
This, at the level of the political elite, this was the big picture that they were working with. Yes. And this is what they were doing. And so we then got the, we nonetheless continued with the conference.
Yes.
And, I'm just going to now refer very quickly to the historical occasion, which, it's in the public domain.
Yes.
Which is, when it became clear that the conference was still going ahead, that the delegates were still going to pass the draft. On the last day, literally, of the conference, on the last, couple of days of on the last day of the conference, literally, there was a walkout.
Yes.
By delegates who are members of the regime. They actually were not that many. When you look at, because remember, Bomas had 600 plus delegates.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and these were people who were within a faction of parliament.
Yeah. So
even though it was the leading parliamentary, even though NARC,
yes,
was the biggest party in parliament, even NARC itself wasn't united. Yeah. Because, even back then, that's when also, aside from Kanu, Raila was, I remember thinking, God, you'd think he's put some little computer chip in our heads, yes, which just, I was like, at one point in time, I very sarcastically said, well, this must be a very powerful man. I mean, he's able to press some little button and these hundreds of people just automatically do whatever.
Yes.
So aside from being little Kanu robots, we were also supposed to be little
Raila robots.
Right, little Raila robots. And so so NARC itself also had started having its fissures.
Yes.
So when you look at who walked out, it was particular elements of NARC. It was not NARC in its totality.
If I remember.
And so you cannot even say even the parliamentarians were united in that, in that walk. Even the regime parliamentarians, the official regime parliamentarians were part of that walkout.
Yes, yes.
Now, one of the things that I remember, and I have not gone into like the things which were good about Bomas that we all know. Yes. I'm focusing on the other. I think because of the purpose of this conversation, and it's, it's a long conversation. I think all that was positive is well documented. Yes. The fact that we were, that there were these gains that were made in the constitution that would ensure equality. The fact that we, as the principles of rule of law and the national values, all those things, I'm not delving into the fact that we were successful with that.
Yes.
Because that's not, those are not the issues.
Yes.
That, that have caused us problems today.
Yes.
And so we then go into, so we begin the process for voting on the different clauses.
Yes.
Of the new constitution. Sorry, of the Bomas draft, most of which have made it into the new constitution actually. Yes. The vast majority. I will talk a little bit about that. And I remember there was a cabinet minister who literally said, you will open that draft, you will vote in this way. And there was, the way we used to sit in Bomas, it was alphabetical order.
Okay.
But not like, there'd be this circle. So you would end up, although my family name begins with a C,
yes,
the people that were directly in front of me, for example, were K's.
Okay.
It was an element of the K's. And then I can't remember who was in front of them.
Yes.
And so from where I was, because I was at the topmost tier, so one of the advantages of sitting over there was that you could see all the way down. There was a gentleman who was representing political parties who, so other than the delegates who were persons with disabilities, because for some of them, there were, the accessibility issues. They were the only set of delegates who sat in a space where they were together.
Yes.
Everybody else was kind of mixed up.
Yes.
And so this guy who was like from one of the political parties was an older gentleman. I could see from where I was, and I actually heard him say, in that case, the answer is no. So I can't remember what the particular question was. But I know this man voted no. And I think, I have a suspicion, because he said in that case,
yes,
I have a suspicion that had we not been being instructed,
yes,
he probably would have voted yes.
Yes.
So he probably would have voted yes on that particular issue in the direction of whatever motion it is that they were attempting to,
yes,
to move. So then we had that dramatic walkout,
yes,
and the ministers and some of their MPs stormed out of the meeting.
Yes.
And we just started voting clause by clause, and it was like a stampede to make sure that we got our draft through, because we had a deadline. Yes. By midnight we had to have this thing through.
Okay.
And so the euphoria when we finished voting, yes, and and Professor Guy announced that we had voted in favor. Yes. The conference itself had passed the draft.
Yes.
The euphoria over there, the camaraderie, the solidarity. I always say that I know wherever I go in Kenya, I have a home.
Yes.
There is somebody who spent that couple of years with me in solidarity, yes, walking that path of trying to deliver this baby.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know that there was no intention whatsoever by the regime of the day, having lost at the National Constitutional Conference, had retreated with the knowledge that because they controlled Parliament, they were going to make sure that draft never became law.
Law, yeah.
And between that draft and the proposed new constitution, which is the one that they drafted in Kilifi and that was taken to the 2005 referendum.
Correct.
Excuse me. We began a life for some of us who had been delegates. I don't know what the experience was for other delegates, but I personally, and there are other delegates, mainly who had been civil society representatives, mm-hmm, because I was a delegate representing women. and we were chosen by civil society organizations,
Yes.
women's organizations.
Yes.
And so we were representing women, but we also were, were generally part of the caucus for civil society reps.
Yes.
And had links with those delegates. We began a life under surveillance. I remember going into meetings because we were trying to see how do we keep this alive.
Yeah.
And so going into meetings at the YMCA.
Yes.
And we were sitting on a table. We weren't that many of us. And on the table next to us was a bunch of police officers.
Mm. Mm.
And you knew they were, and they were like sitting there looking at us.
Mm. Mm.
And so that's when again the phone calls, and you could hear the clicks.
Yes.
And I'm told that there are various stages of surveillance. So at the stage where you can hear the clicks,
yes,
where they want you to know that they are listening in on you.
yes,
they still think they can intimidate you into not having those kind of conversations. And then it moves, I think, from your own experience, it moves beyond that, whereby they then think that, it's a waste of time letting you know, but you will always be under surveillance.
yes.
But so we literally would be sitting in a meeting and people are sitting there watching us. We tried to have meetings, broader meetings, and like our leaflets and things like that, we were just stopped. We were not, we were not able to meet to
Yes.
continue having these discussions. And so then there is the regime of the day then goes to Parliament and institutes a process that allows parliamentarians to amend the Bomas draft.
Yes.
In order to create a new draft that will be put to a vote.
Yes.
I have never known, and I don't know if there is anybody that knows, because we had never been officially told who the authors of the proposed constitution are.
Yes.
All we know is that they met somewhere, purportedly in Kilifi, and drafted that document. I think if it was something that they were proud of, I think they would have been able to tell us that it was them.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they never.
I find it remarkable that they have never been willing, as somebody who had been involved in the constitutional reform movement, because I can tell you the LSK had a draft, the ICJ had a draft that they worked on with the LSK. Yeah, that is the great grandmother. People don't realize that actually even the Guy draft has a great grandmother.
Yes.
So there is the LSK, ICJ, NCCK drafts. None of those people are embarrassed. So why do the people who drafted the proposed new constitution, why are they unwilling to acknowledge that they are the parents of that document? And so they then drafted this draft constitution that there are a lot of things that stayed the same.
Yes.
Between the draft that had been brought to the National Constitutional Conference, that had been written by the KHRC, under Professor Guy, which we usually refer to as the Guy draft, which is the one that was debated at Bomas, and then there was the Bomas, so there's some things that stayed the same. The bulk of all three documents, because those are the mother drafts of the of our current constitution, the bulk of the principles stayed the same.
Yes.
But there were areas where there were material changes, mainly to do with the system of government, to do with devolution, which was completely upended, and we were going to have, instead of a Senate proper, we were now going to have like something that would be equivalent to a council of elders at the national level, something similar to the South African, I think they call it the provincial assembly,
Yes. Yeah.
And so that is where you can begin to discern what it was that were the contentious issues that they never ever told us what they were. It's devolution, it's things to do with the transitional clauses. It is the, although the principle for 2/3 stayed, the formula was tinkered with.
Yep. Remember that.
So devolution, system of government, and then there were things in the transitional clauses which again were tinkered with.
Yes.
So those were where most of the contention, lay.
Yeah.
You don't see real differences around the paper tigers that were raised.
Yes.
Of the Cadi's courts.
Yes.
And, yeah. I personally hold the view that those were used as a shield.
Yeah.
It was a way to mask ethno-regional political positions, which could no longer be fronted as what they actually were.
Yes.
So you create this you basically create these straw soldiers.
Yes.
The army of pregnant women who are going to suddenly come and abort babies the moment a new constitution came into play. Never mind that the old constitution is completely silent on abortion and therefore more liberal.
Yes.
Actually.
That's right. That's right.
The army of gay people that were going to rush through the borders and get themselves, and marry each other. Again, never mind that the old constitution was silent on that question. And so in theory, more liberal than, than the, because the amendment vis-a-vis abortion, the provisions on abortion and the provision on the right to marriage, those were moved at Bomas. The guide draft is consistent with international law and just provides for the right to life and the right to marriage for an adult, it does not, though, so those changes were made in Bomas. So now they become, I think, more convenient rather than say, we don't want devolution.
Yes.
I think there was a coalition working with religious leaders, mainly Christian, with all due respect to us, to now suddenly create tensions where they hadn't been, because the old constitution provided for Qadi's courts. So there wasn't going to be a change in actuality. If one had rejected the current constitution on the basis of those questions, they actually would have ended up, in respect to abortion, in respect to the right to marriage, with a more liberal constitution. And in respect to the Qadi's courts, the same issue, they're pretty much intact, except that now at least there is the recognition of them as courts proper.
Right.
And so that they can be properly treated within the system. But they've always been recognized. They're part of the negotiations for the 10-mile strip, for the coastal strip, because it's predominantly Muslim.
Right. At Atsango, these sort of machinations behind the scenes, the manipulations by the elite, they paint, a very clear picture, as you have described it, of, the kind of rearguard action that you guys had to fight, working into the night to get the Bomas draft passed. This in a very granular way paints the picture of a constitution, as you very aptly described it, that is an unusual situation in Kenya, where the people imposed a constitution on their elite.
Yes.
We had a constitutional referendum in 2005, which failed for the government. The people basically it was a plebiscite on the performance of the government, almost.
Yes.
Then we have the post-election violence in 2007, 2008, after the rigged election in 2007, and we have a committee of experts. There's a sudden new urgency to have a new, basically a new social contract in Kenya after we almost had a civil war. And, through the good work of people like yourselves and the committee of experts, we eventually emerge with a constitution that is still considered one of the most progressive in Africa, all done with all the kind of challenges that you are facing, and all the other delegates. But 10 years later, Atsango, here we are, 2020, and there is talk of changing this constitution.
Mm-hmm.
That it needs to be, it needs to be fixed. It needs to be to be finessed, to be improved upon. Despite the fact that, well, it's quite clear that some of those who are most enthusiastic in calling for the changes were the ones who were, perhaps giving you some of the most determined challenges when you were at Bomas. And I wanted to get your opinion as somebody who has gone through this kind of arm wrestling with the elite as they try to manipulate a constitutional process. It's happening again. Kenyans are watching it, with a certain amount of anxiety. What is your take with regard to what is going on? What are the risks that it portends, and how can it be mitigated? Sorry, a combination of questions there. I'm just conscious that we are pushing on with time.
Yes, yeah, I understand. I think the important contentious issue that I didn't go into was the system of government.
Yeah.
So we went to as the committee of experts, the draft that was presented to the to the Parliamentary Select Committee, on the review of the Constitution, provided for what is referred to as a harmonized draft, provided for as the revised harmonized draft, provided for a parliamentary system of government.
Yes.
The politicians themselves decided that they wanted a presidential system.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. It is the very same politicians right now.
Yes.
That decided they wanted a presidential system.
Yes.
Our responsibility as a committee of experts was to ensure that whatever system we had was one that respected the principle of the rule of law and provided for the separation of powers and provided was a democratic system.
Yes.
We couldn't, for instance, have, even if the politicians had come back with the decision and the public had decided it wanted a monarchical system, for example, yeah. Under the Review Act, it had to be a democratic system.
Right.
And so I have over time come to the conclusion, and when you look at history I think bears me out on this.
Yes.
Whenever we have a mandatory, what I'm now referring to, I said this in the interview for Nane Nane.
Yes.
Whenever we have a mandatory change impending in the a mandatory transition.
Yes.
Brought about either by the demise or the end of terms.
Of a head of state.
Yeah, of a head of state. You see these attempts to change the constitution.
Yeah.
When Jomo Kenyatta died, there were people that wanted to change the constitution so that the vice president could not automatically become president.
Correct.
Yeah?
Correct.
When Section 2A was repealed and Kenya stopped being a one-party state,
yes.
Moi then says, well, I served my 2 terms. I
yes.
served my previous terms under the old constitution. This is a new constitution. You can't apply the law retroactively. And therefore I'm starting my new terms.
Once again.
Yeah. Under the current constitution, in the transitional clauses, there are provisions that prohibit anybody who has been the president from running again.
Yes.
So to prevent that kind of a scenario. So Mwai Kibaki could not have run again.
Yes.
Moi could not have run in 2013 because without those transitional clauses, in theory, both Moi and Mwai Kibaki were eligible to run.
Yes.
And so what am I alluding to? When the regime of the day seeks to manipulate the constitution in order to hold those who are close to the powers that be, in order to continue perpetuating themselves. That's my reading.
Yes.
Yeah. And so my reading of this clamor for a new system of government it's not about the rhetoric which they're using about inclusion.
Yes.
Because under the current constitution, inclusion is one of the principles under Article 10.
That is
Why
true.
haven't they respected it?
Correct.
Article 130, sub-article 2 provides that the cabinet and the executive should represent the ethno-racial diversity
Yes.
of the country.
Yes.
So if these organs currently are not representative,
Yes.
it isn't because there is a problem with the law.
Yes.
Until 2010, there was a problem with the law.
Yes.
You know? So the solution to me does not lie in amending the law.
Yes.
Not for those reasons. I mean, there may be challenges in the current constitution, but it's not the kind of things which they're talking about amending.
Yes.
On the issue of integrity, the draft that we had sent to the Parliamentary Select Committee provided for an Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
Yes.
The parliamentarians threw out the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
Correct.
They gave us a draft, they gave us back the draft without the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and then proceeded to say to us, you know, corruption is a very bad thing. And we would like to, we don't want to think, you know, a constitution is for perpetuity. We don't want to think that in the future, Kenya will always have a problem with corruption. So we think it's extremely pessimistic to have an anti-corruption commission
in the constitution.
In the constitution.
Yes.
So if you look at the provisions on the ethics, on the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, you will notice that they're not created in the same way that the other constitutional commissions are.
Yes.
We reintroduced it. We reintroduced it by way of a requirement because the language was shall.
Yes.
We forced Parliament to have to set up an anti-corruption commission, which would then be a commission that would be considered to be a constitutional commission. But right there, you can see the things that they were having problems with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I think is the biggest challenge to the Constitution today, to the culture of constitutionalism, is Kenya's political culture. We have a political culture and a political elite that has no respect for the rule of law. And that is resistant to that principle. Amongst other things, I also perceive a potential attempt to avoid term limits.
Yes.
I think Kenyans need to be wary of the possibility of a put-in scenario.
Yes.
Whereby somebody leaves
the presidency
as president and comes back as prime minister. Whether or not the incumbent does it,
yes.
If we don't have something in, if they are successful with making the kind of amendments that they're saying they want, yes. And if the incumbent, as he has been saying off late, you know, chooses not to run,
yes.
Even if he was to respect that,
yes.
If there aren't provisions put in that constitution expressly prohibiting him from running,
yes.
Expressly prohibiting anyone who has held the position of president from ever running,
yes.
Because they've all served they will all have served 2 terms, expressly creating term limits and expressly prohibiting anyone who serves as president from being prime minister and vice versa, anyone who serves as prime minister from ever serving as president. If we don't have those kind of express provisions, then somewhere in the future, we will have a put-in scenario.
Yeah.
And also, I think that, you know, politicians, in my observation, can do a lot of damage in a very short time.
Yes.
Yeah. So all they're doing, I think, is also buying time to change the goalposts, because they don't like a change in systems.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Because they then have to learn a new way of doing things.
Yes.
So they're trying to return us. They keep saying that they're creating a prime minister, but if what we were presented with last year,
yes,
was it the beginning? I think it's the end of last year.
Yes.
You know, when BBI when the first report came from the task force.
Yes.
Is anything to go by? That's not a parliamentary system.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's not, you know, so we are being returned to the mongrel that created problems for us originally.
Yes.
And then for me, the even bigger danger, that, you know, that the overriding danger with this whole conversation is the opacity of it.
Yes.
Under the Constitution, one of the entrenched principles in our Constitution and in our constitutional making process, that our culture of constitution making that has evolved over the last 20 plus years.
Yes.
Since, I would say, since 1997,
Yes.
when we began the No Reforms, No Elections campaign,
Right.
is the culture of participation, of participation by the people. And the Constitution is premised on the sovereignty of the people. So how dare any pair of citizens, because that's what it is, get together and decide that they have a problem with the Constitution as it is, and then set up a structure which the public has had no opportunity to determine the process of establishing of that structure.
Yes.
And then be the ones to start telling us what they think should be changed. You know, this whole process is opaque.
Yes.
You know, we don't know, how was it determined that there was a need for a task force? And then, at what point was it determined that that task force should examine the issue of the Constitution?
Yes.
How was it decided who should then do that work? Because you see, first of all, the public has to, even if at least through the delegated authority given to parliamentarians, even if through parliament. Yes. You know, because even that representation was not used.
Correct.
Yeah, the public has to have determined that there was an issue at hand.
Yes.
And then having decided that there was an issue, the public then should have had some opportunity to say, this is how we want to go about doing this. And then there should have been an opportunity for citizens who have the competence to actually walk us through this process, to apply, so that we could be sure and satisfied as a country that the best of our minds would be guiding us through this process. Mm. And I'm not saying, it could be that by coincidence, we've got all those things, but there's supposed to be transparency. There's supposed to have been an opportunity for everybody to participate, including in determining what the process is. All of that should have been in the public domain.
Correct.
The public should have had an opportunity to say, we think you're right on this point, but we also think this and this and this needs to be looked into.
Yes.
None of that has been available.
No, I mean, it's been an opaque process. I'm conscious we haven't finished Atsango, but we have time.
Oh, okay.
While we're still on air, I'm going to ask you that we do a part 2, because this is the big political issue. I mean, as I said, the political class in Kenya right now is engaged in major realignments as we go into 2022. And I'm very keen to get your views on, this is a critical moment. We have a major political transition happening. There's talk of changing the constitution. There are all these machinations that you're describing that are going on behind the scenes. The process is very opaque, and that is what is very different about it compared to what happened at Bomas, which included, as I said, 600 delegates from all different sectors and all different parts of the country. And so, if you don't mind, I'll ask that we pause here, and in part 2, I'd like to unpackage a bit deeper the implications of some of the changes that are being proposed now. As you said, these are things that have happened before. I'd also like to get your opinion on the role of civil society, which has taken a bit of a pummeling since 2013, and is sort of gathering its wits. But then also seek very much your opinion on if something needed to be changed, what would it be to strengthen the Constitution yet further? But I'm afraid we'll have to keep that for next time. And
Okay.
And thank you very, very much, Atsango Chesoni, for your time this early morning.
Thank you, John.